Hey there! So in the last tutorial, we created a very simple drawing app simply by placing the background function in function setup and placing the ellipse in function draw. There is another way to approach this problem using a p5.js function called createGraphics. If you've ever used a drawing application like Photoshop or GIMP, you might know the idea of separating different graphical elements into different layers. And so I'm going to show you how to do that with createGraphics. This can help you make a much more flexible drawing app and would be very useful, especially if you create an app that requires collaborative drawing from different people in the same chat room, or if you need to erase or delete one of the layers. Let's start from where we wrap up last time. This is the Tiny Bones template 2. You can find it in the video description. Let's remix this project. And let's start creating our first createGraphic layer. So in order to do that, we are going to create a new variable, and we're going to call it let layer 1. So this is the variable we're going to use to store our createGraphic layer. And the next thing we can do is going into function p5 setup, and I'm going to comment out background for now because we're actually going to move it into our new createGraphic layer. And here I'm going to say layer 1 equals createGraphics, and for the width and the height, I'm going to simply put width, comma, height. So by writing width, comma, height, essentially it's going to inherit the width and height of the canvas. You can obviously, like dedicate any width and height, any size and dimension that you want for your new createGraphic layer. So you can think about createGraphic essentially as a process where p5 generates an image and renders an image, a graphical layer outside of the canvas. And whatever you put on top of it would get taken back and layered and composited on top of the canvas. So here we have layer 1, and I'm actually going to just dedicate layer 1 as the layer we use to place the background. So the next step we can take here, I'm going to copy this line for the background, delete it, and I'm gonna go into my drawing app here. And on the very first line, I'm going to write layer 1 dot background, followed by the RGB value. So by writing line 30, layer 1 dot background, it's saying that assign this background color, to layer 1, which is a createGraphic layer. And one more thing you have to do in order to place that image that's being rendered outside of the canvas back onto the canvas is you have to write this image layer 1 0 0 width, height. So what that line is saying is load this image that's being rendered outside of the canvas called layer 1 and load it at the X and Y coordinate at 0, 0 and add the width and height of the canvas. So here I'm just gonna put a little note here. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's click on Show in a new window. Okay, so there it is. So we see this blue background color that's attached to layer 1. Great. Now when I move my mouse around, the brush stroke has disappeared. and that is because now the image layer 1 is covered at the very top of my canvas, and my brush stroke is underneath and we can see it. So now in order for us to bring the brush stroke back, we have to create a second layer. So when you use createGraphics, everything has to sort of fall into this logic of being placed and organized neatly into different layers. So I'm gonna go back up. Instead of writing like, let layer 2, I can actually just add after layer 1, comma, layer 2. Cool. So again, the process that follows is essentially very similar. So I'm going to go on the P5 setup and copy and paste that and write and create a layer 2 instead. So now we have 2 layers. And going into Drawing app and here's what I need to do. Layer 2 dot no stroke. Okay, and layer 2 dot fill and layer 2 dot ellipse. So what this does is assigning all these different attributes to layer 2 and saying that this is specific to layer 2. And now the last step I have to take is make sure that I load the image for layer 2 onto the canvas. Okay, so let's come back here and here it is back again. Our drawing app is back, except now it's neatly separated into different layers. Okay, and one more thing I would like to cover is altering the app so that the drawing only happens when the mouse is pressed. So in order to do that, we need to write something called a conditional statement. The idea of a conditional statement, starts very simple and can turn very complex. I'll share a link here so you can learn more about it if you're not familiar. But for the sake of staying on time with this tutorial, I'm going to just cover what you have to write to create that click and draw effect. So right after layer 2, I'm going to write a conditional statement. A conditional statement a lot of times start with an if. So if parenthesis and followed by curly bracket. So if something happens, so if X happens, then execute Y. Sort of the basic logic of an if statement. So in here, I'm going to write if mouse is pressed. So mouse is pressed is something default to P5 that you can load, which check whether mouse is being pressed at the moment. Okay, so if mouse is pressed, then I can actually copy this layer 2 ellipse line into the result of if mouse is pressed. Okay, so let's see if that worked. Let's come back here and I'm gonna reload the page and see. Ooh, yeah, so now the line only draws when my mouse is pressed. And when it's released, and when I move around, nothing happens. It's a very simple line, as you can see, and I hope that it's not too confusing yet, this idea of an if statement. If you want to write, conditionals that's more complicated, it takes practice, especially if this is totally new to you. But yeah, for the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how you could store every single x and y coordinate for every single ellipse inside an array, so that later on when you are communicating with someone else inside a chat room, you can send your drawing over to them and vice versa. See you soon.